Hi, I'm John Ray, and welcome to the Thriving Podcast. I'm your host and intuitive coach, dedicated to amplifying your intuition, transforming your mind, and igniting your inner magic to create a life you're obsessed with. 2 years ago, I was burnt out as fuck in a toxic relationship and a successful tech career that I just wasn't happy in anymore. I left it all behind with no plan, and now I'm running my own business, immersed in purpose and passion, happily married to my soulmate, and living out my dreams every single day. And if you're badass enough to be listening to this podcast, then you're already on the fast track to doing the same, babe. On this podcast, we'll dive into all things life, business, heart, mind, body, and soul, empowering you to up-level your life and embody your happiest, healthiest, and hottest self. It's time to make idealistic your new realistic, because you're not just here to survive, you're here to thrive. Welcome to episode 3 of the podcast. So today I kind of want to just riff, which is like honestly what I want to do most episodes. But I want to talk about all of the ways basically that our brains trick us into not taking action and not following our intuition and not moving forward and going after what we want. Basically, the causes of procrastination or even symptoms of procrastination, self-sabotage, if you're familiar with that term. What I'm really talking about is overthinking, perfectionism, when things feel really complicated, and basically kind of like debunking all of those things and exposing them for what they are, if that makes sense. And really what this is stemming from and what inspired me to talk about this is me. I'm kind of calling myself out on my own bullshit with this podcast so far, because why I started this podcast, I mean, I wanted to start a podcast for so long, and a big reason is because I am a talker. That's where I really shine. You know, like I can write, but I'll overthink when I write too. I'm definitely not immune to overthinking or perfectionism by any means, but kind of where I really can channel the most clearly and the most effectively is just when I'm talking. And when I really get going, like I'm on fire, you know what I mean? And I've had so many moments where I will like be on a walk or be in my car and I'll just start talking about something like as if I'm, this would be back when I would be like imagining that I had a podcast and I would like pretend that I was just talking on a podcast about a topic that I felt passionate about. And actually, as I'm saying this, I actually remember I used to have this kind of thought, I don't know what I would call it, like kind of it was like an idea, I guess. But like a fantasy maybe is the word I'm looking for, where like I wanted to be this like mysterious person that would, in the beginning of the day back in high school, I would sneak into the bathroom and like write a topic on the stalls of the bathroom. And then it would just become like a known thing that everybody would come into school and then like go check the bathroom topic. And that would be like what people are talking about that day at school. Like, isn't it so random? That just came to me because I was just, as I'm talking about this, thinking about how I've always just been so into the idea of like just having one topic to riff on. Like, it's not totally related, but it kind of is. Like that weird random fantasy was really just driven by my desire to like have permission or have the opportunity to just like have a topic and just be able to like talk about my thoughts on it, which is literally this podcast. Anyway, my goal for this episode is also to cut as little as possible because I really just want to keep it as raw and authentic and conversational as I can. Because again, like I was saying, when I'll go on these riffs in my car on a walk that are just out of nowhere and they're not for anybody, they're just me channeling in my own expression. And at the end of it, I'll be like, oh my God, that was literally so fucking fire. Like that could have been on a stage in front of thousands of people. That was so fucking good. Why wasn't I recording that? But then, of course, as soon as I sit down in front of the microphone to actually record something like that for other people, I start overthinking and I start being a perfectionist. And the last episode that I recorded, and, hopefully it's not in this state anymore by the time you're listening to this and it's out, but I kept listening back to it and just feeling like something's off. Like I felt like it was just kind of boring. And I was just like, what is it? And really it was just like, it was too polished. Like I had stopped and started too many times. It was too edited. I was like getting so focused, and I was talking about a pretty deep topic, but I was getting so focused on, you know, trying to make sure I was explaining it in like the perfect way and like it made sense, and I really been getting a lot of signs this past week to just like really come back to like what I know to be true, right? Which is, authenticity matters and energy speaks so much louder than words. And there's a quote that I heard actually a couple weeks ago, and I'm probably going to butcher it because I'm going to try to say it off the top of my head, but it was like, you will be judged by the quality of your speaking, the quality of your writing, and the quality of your ideas in that order, or something like that. It was from like an MIT professor. And I read that and I was like, yeah, that's so fucking true. And it's funny because at the time I was like really talking a lot about how confidence is so important and like energy and the way you present yourself is so much more important. I was talking in the context of selling. It's so much more important than what you're actually saying because people feel the confidence from you and they feel your energy, and that makes an impact on how they feel. And people make decisions based off their emotions, and people act based off of their emotions and how they feel because, again, everything is energy. Energy is the universal language. And then we use like logic and words and everything to try to back those feelings up and try to explain what we're feeling, right? And explain those decisions. So anyway, it was really just coming back to like, my energy is the most important thing with this podcast. It's not about saying things perfectly or like it needs to be the best possible content in terms of, the message or the lesson. Like, yes, obviously I want to give you guys like such great advice and really good lessons and big aha moments and breakthroughs. But more than that, I want to just help you feel better and I want to raise your vibration, right? Like I want to help you elevate your energy because again, everything is energy. So that is the most important thing for you, for me, for everyone, for the world. So yeah, so basically with this episode, I just kind of made a commitment to myself. I was like, you know what? Like, fuck all this like polishing and trying to make it perfect. Like you're doing this podcast because you are in your element when you are just talking and being authentic and when you're feeling yourself and you're in your element, right? And the energy is flowing, you're channeling and you're not like overthinking every sentence and making sure you're explaining it exactly the perfect way and da-da-da-da-da. So that's what we're doing this episode. So that's kind of like an overview of like where, my headspace is with this. And I kind of want to just really for the rest of the episode, go kind of a little deeper into, all the ways that comes up and how to navigate it and, overcome it. And kind of like the symptoms of, when that you're basically in a low vibration, like that you're suppressing your intuition and you're suppressing really your magnetism. Because really that's what that is. When you hear people talk about magnetism and magnetic energy, that is when you are just in flow and you're just channeling and you're in your element and you're being authentic and you're not in your head, right? You're not thinking about like being perfect or trying to say the right thing. And it's not, you're not thinking about how complicated it is and you're not trying to like make decisions. You're just doing. You don't even have time to stop and think because you're just being and you're just so in your being and you are so in flow and you're feeling so confident in what you're saying and you're so, on fire, right? That's what you say, like on fire because it's electric, right? And it's electric because it's energy. And it's literally, right? Like your manifestations are drawn to you. People are drawn to you. Like a magnet, right? Like imagine two magnets snapping together. Or I don't feel like I need to explain this metaphor further, but I hope this is making sense. But again, even if it's not, this is just my practice for this episode of I'm not allowing myself to stop it and trying to make it make sense. So on that note, what are the ways that our brain tries to trick us and basically that take us out of our magnetism, right? Number one, overthinking, right? So basically anytime you catch yourself overthinking, that's a red flag, right? Overthinking is not helpful. It's actually, and I know most people will probably say like, well, yeah, I hate overthinking. I'm such an overthinker, but I feel like a lot of you, I didn't realize this for a long time. I feel like a lot of us don't actually realize that it's actually not helpful at all. Like, how do I put this? I used to think that I didn't think my overthinking was bad. Like, I was annoyed that I did it, but I thought that it was actually helping me make better decisions. You know what I mean? I thought that overthinking was actually helpful because I was just fully, like, thoroughly analyzing every single possible aspect of the decision, and it was ensuring that I was making the right decision. But that's actually not true. It's actually the opposite. What the reality of the situation is, the more time that you give yourself to think about something and the more you think about something, the farther you get from the solution, from the answer, from your intuition, right? Because your intuition and your analytical, logical mind, they don't really operate in the same, they don't work together, right? They work against each other. And really what's happening when you're overthinking is your analytical, logical mind, right? Like your brain and your intuition are arguing. They're debating. I think of it, I was describing it to a client the other day as like an angel and devil on your shoulder. Like, you've always seen the cartoon of like the angel and the devil and they're arguing. That's literally what it is. And not saying that your brain is the devil, like your analytical survival brain is very useful in many ways, obviously for helping you survive. And it's even useful for, helping to interpret your intuition and, how to take an intuitive nudge and actually like put it into action. But in this case, it is kind of like the devil, like arguing against, like the angel. Like the angel's your intuition that's like telling you, like, believing the best in you and like coming from this place of love and confidence and belief and worthiness and abundance and gratitude, right? And then the devil, which is like, in this case, it's really the fear part of your brain, your survival brain, right? This is a pretty basic self-development concept, but I don't know that I've talked about it on here yet. I think I did in the last episode, but this is really like foundational for self-development and, getting out of survival and into thrival, if thrival is a word. But yeah, your human brain, like your survival brain, your biological brain, right, is always trying to keep you safe. And so it's operating from a place of fear. It's operating from a place of lack and scarcity because that's the safest way from a biological, physical standpoint to survive, right? Of like thinking like, well, okay, like there's not gonna be enough food. Like what happens if we run out of food? Or what happens if this, like looking out for danger, right? Like making sure that our needs are met to survive. So that's why your brain is always operating from that perspective. So that's why like the devil is over here, like coming from fear and like doubt and negativity, arguing against your intuition that is coming from positivity and confidence, right? And possibility, because that's how they're both designed to operate. And it's all by design. But we don't have to go too deep into that. I'm pretty sure I talked about that last episode. But yeah, so that's really what's happening when you're overthinking, is those two parts of you are debating. So basically, as soon as you catch yourself overthinking, this is going to be huge. Here, get ready for the aha moment. As soon as you catch yourself overthinking, you know that you actually already know the answer. Let that sink in for a second, right? Because we think as long as we're overthinking, we haven't come up with the answer yet, right? We're overthinking to figure out the answer. But as soon as you catch yourself overthinking, that actually means you already know the answer. You already have the answer. Because if you didn't, then there would be no argument. And the reason why you just keep thinking about it and you're ignoring the answer that you already have is just because that answer is scary or uncomfortable and you don't want to do it, right? So you're basically trying to come up with a magical third answer. But the universe functions in duality, right? So there's no magical third answer. There's just your truth and not your truth, right? The voice of your intuition and the voice trying to get you to ignore your intuition or talk you out of listening to your intuition or believing that what your intuition is saying is your truth. And I just want to call out here too, this is specifically talking about overthinking. Okay, so this is once you're in the debate, right? The debate is the red flag of you already know the answer. It's not the same as just thinking. Right, so our analytical brains are very useful in analyzing and problem solving. And there's a difference between when you're actually thinking and like going through all the options, right? And whittling down and figuring things out, right? That's a process in itself. It's once you get to that overthinking stage, which is the symptom of that is the debate, the back and forth between the two voices. So I hope that makes sense. Because the difference really is when you're just thinking, not overthinking, it's just one voice, right? What's coming to mind is Sindri and I were recently developed a little bit of an obsession with the game with Pandemic. Well, it was Iberia, like a version of Pandemic, but we were playing it all weekend. And I'm thinking back to that when I was thinking about what's the best course of action, what's the best way to map out my next turn, problem solving and analyzing. I was just thinking with my one voice, well, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, right? But there was no debate and there was just one voice trying to figure things out. I never got to the point where it was one voice saying do this and one voice saying do this or don't do that, or you know what I mean? So yeah, it's the difference between one voice and two voices basically. So in order to have two voices, one of them has to be the answer and one of them has to be the thing trying to talk you out of listening to the answer, right? And that's also a pretty quick and easy hack that you can use to help determine which one is your intuition and which one is the fear or your mind trying to talk you out, is because the mind is usually the one that's trying to talk you out of something, right? It's usually the one that is trying to justify doing something or not doing something. Your intuition is never trying to justify. It's never trying to convince. Your intuition is always very simple, very straightforward. And again, I come back to that angel and devil image because imagine the angels, I feel you know how when they're cartoony, they're both kind of it's made out to be funny, right? And they'll kind of be arguing. I think the devil's always that little annoying whiny guy, right? And he's jumping up and down. He's but, me, right? And the angel's just not even bothered, right? Super brushing it off, just such a calm confidence, right? Just so at peace because they truly know with every fiber of their being, right? To their core that this is the truth. And it's kind of the thing of truth is simple and truth doesn't, feel the need to prove itself because it's just already true, right? It's proven just by existing, by the nature of it being truth. I go back to this example all the time, but it's if I say the sky is blue, right? I wouldn't feel any need to convince you that the sky is blue. I would just say it. Matter of fact, I'd be the sky is blue, right? And then if someone else tried to be no, the sky is purple. Imagine the debate between the two of us, right? I would literally just be the sky is blue. Literally look at the sky. It's just a fact that the sky is blue, right? And the person that's trying to say it's purple would be having to try to spin all these arguments and come up with all these reasons why, when I can literally just be chilling and be I mean, it's blue. The truth is doing the arguing for me just by existing and being true. And your intuition is your truth. So that's a really simple way to identify which voice is your intuition. I get a lot of questions often, how do I distinguish my intuition from my anxiety? And I am going to do a full episode on this, maybe even next episode, because like I said, I get so many questions on this and I have a lot of kind of tips and tricks and hacks on how to do this, but this is one of my go-to ways. And so I always say complexity is a red flag. Right? So when you're overthinking and you come to those two voices in your head, ask yourself, which one is trying to make it seem like this is so complicated and which one is actually saying something really simple, right? So it might be one voice is saying, hey, you should break up with your boyfriend. And the other voice is but, what, it's really not that bad. Or what if we could fix things? Or but he's a da-da-da-da. Or what if I can't find someone better? Or all that, right? Pretty easy to tell which voice is pretty simple and convicted, right? In their stance, and which one is kind of messy and complex and trying to justify and trying to convince, right? And really trying to prove yourself. So it's if you had two people in front of you and they're both trying to make a case for something, which one would you believe? You know what I mean? And again, that's a kind of obvious example, but at the same time, I know we've all been there, right? And we want to listen to that other voice so bad. Same thing with the classic. I mean, these were obviously my two big ones, relationship and job, but it's there's one voice saying hey, you don't like this job, you should leave. And there's another job that's oh, but what am I going to do for money? But da-da-da-da-da, but I'm going to let people down, but people aren't going to judge me. I don't have a plan, right? but what if this, or what if I could make it better, right? It's actually very clear, like, which voice is which. Or the one voice is like, hey, you should start this business. Hey, you should start a podcast. Hey, you should try this coaching thing. And then the other voice is like, I have no idea how to start that. That sounds really complicated. People are going to judge me if I do that. I don't even have time for that. Like, how would I start that? That sounds really overwhelming. I don't know anything about that. Like, I'm not cut out for that. Like, only other people can do that. I don't even know how I would make money from that, right? Like, then it's like that complexity voice and really like the chaotic voice a lot of the time. That's the red flag, right? It's trying to make it complicated and it's actually not complicated, right? It's trying to make it seem complicated so you don't take action and listen to the other voice, the voice of your intuition. Because it's actually not complicated, right? Oh, you want to leave your job? You leave. Like you quit. You put in your 2 weeks, period, done, right? We make it out to seem complicated because we're trying to foresee out the next 1,700 steps after that first step, right? But if we can learn to shift and instead operate in one step at a time, right? Then life actually becomes so much less complicated. It becomes actually very, very simple, right? I always use the metaphor of climbing a mountain. It's so basic, but it's literally like you look up at a mountain from the base and you would not be able to tell anyone exactly how you're going to get to the top of that mountain. All you know is that you're going to take one step and then the next step, right? And you're going to keep figuring out what kind of step you need to take, or if you need to go around a branch, or if you need to do this or that as you go along the mountain, right? Because you can't know what you're going to run into until you're there, right? You don't know what you're going to have to navigate halfway up the mountain until you get there. And all you can do is literally just take one step at a time. And that is actually very simple. It's like same thing with this podcast. Like my brain was trying to make it out to feel like it's so complicated. There's so many things. Oh, but like I have to, plan out my first however many episodes, and they all have to have like a flow, and I want to make sure that like the third episode makes sense, like coming after the second episode, and like what are the most important topics to talk about first, and da-da-da. And then it's like, actually, all these questions are so unnecessary. Like, it's actually very simple what I need to do. It's sit down, press record, and start talking to the mic, right? Like, anytime you catch yourself starting to complicate or actually feeling like it's complicated, because that's the thing is, like, a lot of the time, like, you're believing the voice, right? Because the voice, your mind does a very, very good job of disguising itself, right? And it really is difficult, especially like if you haven't really done this before or you're first becoming aware of like, this is how it works, to zoom out and kind of realize like, oh, like I'm feeling and thinking like this is so complicated, but it's actually not. Like that's actually just a story that I'm making up, like that my brain is telling me. And it actually doesn't have to be that complicated. And really the point of me explaining all of this is so that you now know, like you have a way to instantly know when you're overthinking, like what the answer is, right? And so kind of like I was saying in the beginning, now you can kind of call yourself out on your bullshit, right? You don't have to actually feel like you don't know the answer anymore. Now you can actually recognize, hey, I know the answer. This is the answer. I'm just overthinking because, and then you can actually figure out why you're trying to talk yourself out of it, right? And that's where you start to illuminate like what fears are in the way of you actually following your intuition. But it's just like, clarity, right? Like at least now we have clarity and then we just have fear we have to work through instead of just being stuck in like confusion, right? So I hope this is making sense. So to sum up so far, overthinking is a sign that you already have the answer. Overthinking is a red flag. Simple is intuition. Complexity is a red flag. It's never actually that complicated. All you have to do is take one step at a time. And it's actually kind of fascinating how the mind works and how good it is at this because it knows that your brain will always take the easiest path, right? Again, your brain is trying to help you survive. So it's always, again, operating out of lack. It's thinking about conserving energy and effort, right? So it's always going to want to take the path of least resistance. So the more complicated that you believe something is, the less likely you are to take action on it or to move forward with it, right? Like even with starting a business, right? Business is not complicated, but I know back before I started a business, or even like back when I still thought I wasn't even cut out for entrepreneurship. And I was like, oh my God, like that just like starting a business, just the phrase, I was like, that just probably entails so much. Like I didn't even know anything about it. And I was just assuming it's complicated, right? And that was just because I didn't know. But even coming forward to the point where I actually decided to start one, right? I still felt overwhelmed. I was like, oh, I have so many questions. Do I need to start an LLC? Do I need a website? Do I need this? Do I need that? Thinking that I needed some like big complex strategy or like roadmap or funnel, like what even is a funnel, right? Your brain just automatically goes to, oh my God, there's so much I don't know and I don't even know what I don't know, right? Because unknown is scary. And so your brain wants to go immediately to what's the scariest thing about this because it's trying to gauge for danger. It seemed so complicated. But what I did to actually get my business started is I stopped focusing on everything I didn't know. And I was like, okay, well, what do I know? Right? Like, all right, I know I need to at least make an Instagram, right? And I know I need to at least figure out what I'm going to do in my business, right? And like who I want to help. And then maybe the next step for me was like, all right, I know that I want support and I want guidance and I do want more of a structure to figure out the steps that come after that, right? So my next step was just investing in a coach, right? So that's another really, really powerful antidote to overthinking and to when things feel or seem complicated is stop focusing on what you don't know. Stop asking for all the answers to these questions that you don't know and shift your focus to what do I know, right? And that's, again, always coming back to what is my next step? Again, your intuition will always be guiding you to the next step. And then the magic is once you take that step, right? The answers to those questions that are way far off in the distance, like those steps that are so far down the line, will illuminate as you continue to walk down the path. And it's like, you don't need to know those now. You know enough to get started. It's just your brain trying to make it seem more complicated than it is so that you don't do it, you don't take action, and you don't go into the scary change, like big scary change. Big scary change, bad for brain. That is like the crux of like all growth and personal development and procrastination is like every problem at the root of every single problem is like big scary change, bad for brain, bad for safety and survival. And again, once you actually are able to get over that hump of like the fake complexity, right? And you actually start walking down the path, you realize how simple it really is. And now that I've actually started my business and I've been in business for almost a year, I'm like, oh my God, business is actually so freaking simple. Like everything is so simple. It's basics. There are basics to everything. And this is really like I always say, cliches are cliches for a reason. And it's because the answers to life literally always are that simple, right? And of course, like I'm not saying like now that I'm a year into business, I know everything and like I don't have questions anymore, but it's just like the answers are still just simple answers. It's still just back to basics, one step at a time. Like that never changes. It's literally like back to basics will always be the way, right? So anytime, even like in terms of this complexity as a red flag concept, anytime you see someone like selling something that seems complex or overwhelming, like that's a red flag. If they're trying to like say that something is complicated, it's not. Like whatever they're saying is the answer, it's not it. Because the answer is always so simple, I promise, right? The solution is always simple. If you have a problem, like think about whatever problem like you're dealing with right now, whatever decision you're facing right now, right? The solution is actually very simple. What's complicated is you trying to avoid the solution, right? Or trying to find a solution that will not actually solve your problem, right? Like trying to find a way around it or a way that's easier or less scary or, less difficult. Again, that magical third door. But the solutions that come from your intuition that are truly aligned with your higher path, that are going to help you grow and improve your life, that are aligned with truth, are always actually going to be so simple. Also, I should add, simple, this is probably obvious by now, simple does not mean easy, right? So the easy answer is also most often probably not the answer, right? Like the quick fix kind of answer. I'm not saying that like sometimes the solution feels like light and it feels good to you. It may be just the accepting that that is the solution that doesn't feel easy, but then like actually implementing it feels easy. But especially in terms of these like, bigger decisions with like higher stakes, like trying to build a business or trying to make more money or trying to find the love of your life or, whatever it is, the quick fix solutions, just don't confuse that with simplicity, right? So the intuitive solution is normally going to be simple and difficult and scary, right? My sister had this breakthrough the other day when I was talking to her and I told her, and she was trying to, figure out what her intuition was telling her to do in a certain situation. And and I was like, how do you feel like when you think about, going forward with this thing? And she was like, that sounds really scary. And I was like, good, perfect. Like, that means that we're there, right? That's your intuition. She was like, oh, what? And I was like, yeah, the thing your intuition is telling you to do is normally going to be the scary thing, right? Again, like your intuition is also going to be guiding you to feeling good a lot of the time, like taking care of yourself. Like it's not always like scary and uncomfortable in like a big bad way, but it's like uncomfortable in just a way that it goes against your conditioning or like what feels safe to you. Like your intuition could be guiding you to, take a bubble bath. Like taking a bubble bath isn't scary, but it might feel scary to take a bubble bath because it means you have to take a break from work, and that feels scary because you feel like if you take a break from work, you're not going to get enough done and you're going to fall behind and you're going to become a failure, right? So that's what I mean by like scary and uncomfortable, right? And what feels safe to you, again, can also be programmed to like be good things. So it's not always like, it's like bad, but it's normally going to be uncomfortable because again, your intuition is always guiding you to growth. So I hope that makes sense. And again, if you can learn to shift your mindset and your perspective into one step at a time, right? And really being in the present, right? Because that's also like why we start to complicate is because again, we're trying to think so many steps down the line. We're already focused on the future and we're forgetting to just be in the present, the here and now, right? One foot in front of the other. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? We get so caught up, again, it's just our mind trying to make it seem complicated. Right? It has to be perfect. It has to be this. I have to have a perfect plan. I have to have it all mapped out, right? Perfection is a myth. Perfection is a myth and complicated is a myth. And again, they're all just, really different manifestations of overthinking, right? Which is just a manifestation of fear and disconnection from or denial of your intuition. And that's what I was doing with the podcast, right? Like with the last episode, I was trying to make it perfect. And I had to come back and be like, John Marie, like, remember, like, not only is there no such thing as perfect, but the more perfect you try to make it, the less real it's going to be, right? The less raw it's going to be, the less authentic, the less magnetic, the less powerful, right? So it's like, actually, you're only hurting yourself the more perfect you try to make something. The closer to perfect is the further away from real, from truth, right? From authentic, from magnetic, from your true energy, right? It's like you're what's the word? I want to say like squashing all the energy, but what's like you're taking like a fire out thingy, like on Survivor, what's a torch snuffer? Like you're taking a torch snuffer to your flame, your fire. And that's what draws people in, right? That's, your light. So you want that burning bright, right? You don't want to be putting that out. You don't want to be snuffing it. And the more you try to perfect and the more you try to fit into a box, this is with anything, right? Like with your business or on social media, you think that like, oh, well, everybody makes these kinds of posts, so I have to make this kind of post, or everybody does it this way, so I have to do it this way, right? Or like day-to-day life, well, everybody's wearing this thing, so I have to wear this thing, right? And like, it's kind of, again, the classic cliche, because again, the cliches are cliches for a reason, because they're true, is like, you don't want to blend in. Blending in is boring. Blending in is not magnetic. It's like blah, right? You want to be the one that stands out. You want to be you. And the more you are, the more of you that you allow to shine and exist, and the more of your authentic energy you allow to flow, again, the more magnetic you will be. That's the more impact you'll have, the more reach you'll have, the more love and success and abundance you'll attract, the more aligned and happy and at peace and confident you'll feel. right? Because you'll just be, again, literally in your element. Like, think about even like that phrase, in your element, like what that even means. Like, you are literally just being you. So yeah, fuck perfectionism. And I always say, I've probably said this in like literally every like class I've ever given or every speech that I've ever given on confidence and anything along these lines. But not only is perfectionism a myth and undesirable, but like messiness and mistakes are actually desirable, like actively desirable. People freaking love when you make mistakes. They love seeing you be messy. They love when you're vulnerable, right? There's a reason why by this point, this will be up in like 3 weeks. So by this point, this trend's a bit old or outdated, but there was this trend going around social media of like, social media is a highlight reel. Here are like some things I don't normally share. And every single person that I saw posting, you know, their, I forgot what it's called, like their real reel, or their like not highlight reel, their low light reel or whatever, like posting their deepest insecurities and flaws and things that they're really scared to actually share with people, you know, that there's a lot of fear around sharing. Every single person that I saw do a post like that, the post was their most engaged with post. So much support and love, right? And for myself too, the most engagement I've gotten on a post by far, right? So many comments telling me how relatable it was, encouraging me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing, right? People freaking love when you're vulnerable and when you actually show that you're not perfect. And the reason is because nobody is perfect. And so when we see somebody else showing and proudly even proclaiming like, hey, I'm not perfect, or even just making a mistake, even if they're not calling attention to it, it makes us feel better because we're like, oh, hey, I make mistakes too. I'm not perfect either. Like, and if you just made that mistake and you could still put it out there, right? Or you could like proudly proclaim that like, you don't know about this, then I feel a little bit better about myself and that I could do that. And I don't have to try to pretend to be perfect either, right? Because how ridiculous is it for us all to be walking around trying to pretend that we're perfect and we know everything when we all freaking know so obviously that there's no such thing, right? It's an impossible task. It's an impossible standard. So wouldn't it be just so much freaking easier if we all were just like agreed to be just like, oh yeah, hey, like as a society, can we like openly remember and agree like as a whole that perfect doesn't exist and just stop trying and just like own and embrace our mistakes and our quote unquote flaws? Right? This is also why I love groups so much and, you know, group experiences and leading group workshops and classes and coaching and things like that, because it's so powerful to be vulnerable with other people and to share these things that you're feeling so alone in and to realize, oh, we're actually all going through literally the same exact stuff. Like in different contexts, right? In different ways, different levels. But we literally all face the same fears, right? We all feel the same like stupid irrational thoughts sometimes. And it's so empowering and comforting when you really can viscerally experience and realize, right? Because you're like, yeah, I know other people do it. So I'm not the only one, blah, 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 blah. But when you're in your head and you're stuck in your own world, it's so hard to really zoom out and realize that. And when you actually are with other people and it's like, oh my God, yeah, like I deal with that too, right? You feel so much more connected to them and you feel so much better about yourself. You know, it's like the other day I saw a comment on a TikTok and it was such a niche TikTok, like, an experience that you could totally feel like, oh my God, like this is so specific and weird and random, like, and feel like no one else has experienced it. But that TikTok went viral because, like, again, like the comment was, oh my God, I've literally never had a unique experience in my life, right? It was about her like picking a scab on her head and then she lost it in her hair or something like that. I've never experienced that, but it's like, wow, if this many other people relate to this specific as fuck experience that I thought was so weird and random, if that many other people experience that, what experience could I possibly be alone in? You know what I mean? So think about that the next time you catch yourself like falling into perfectionism and trying to make it perfect. Number one, again, your magnetic energy. If you're trying to reach somebody or reach clients or, impress someone, like someone who's interviewing you or a director or trying to grow an audience, and you're trying to perfect your messaging or your writing or your content or all the technicalities of your performance or, right, like make it perfect, remember you're actually going to reach them so much more powerfully and make so much more of an impact and connect with them so much more by focusing on your energy and being in your element and being as real and raw as possible and having your emotion in whatever you're creating or putting out there than you are by perfecting the words, right? It reminds me of another story. I had a client who was preparing for an audition and she was like so stressed out about hitting this one no, and I'm not 100% on that no, and if I don't land that no, I'm not going to get it. And I had like really, we like had to come out of that and like be like, all right, how can you bring your emotion into this performance and feel your performance like so with such a potent energy, right? That the note doesn't matter, right? I know for me, when I'm listening to music, I actually prefer when it's like not perfect technically, but I feel so much emotion from it. And she actually ended up going into the audition. She didn't hit the note, but she did hit the emotion and she got the part. So perfect success story for what I'm talking about. And number 2, remember that those mistakes that you're trying to fix and trying to perfect, you're actually going to be reaching people less the more of those that you fix and change, right? Leave it messy, right? Obviously, yeah, like, especially if you're a creative, like, you don't want to just be like a spew, right? Like, that was my thing with the episodes. Like, I was like, yeah, I want to like be in my element and just channel and talk, but also like, I want it to make sense and like be cohesive, right? Like, I don't want to just be like rambling to where you're like, oh, what is she even talking about? And it's kind of the difference between the creative process, right? Like the process of creation, and then being able to recognize when that process is over and you're shifting into perfectionism. So of course, there's a middle ground with everything. Of course, life is all about balance. But, remember, like, think about the last time you saw somebody make a mistake. Like, maybe you saw, like, a musician post a song or even performing live and they made a mistake. How did you feel when you saw that? Right? Or maybe you saw someone, in a video talking and maybe they fumbled over their words. Or maybe you saw a writing and it had a typo or something, right? Think about the last time that you saw somebody make a mistake, whatever it was, even just now. See how I fumbled over my words? And think about how that made you feel, right? Versus think about the last time that you saw somebody do something perfectly, right? Or almost perfectly again, right? Like there's not really thing as perfectly, but like maybe you saw someone like perform a piece like with, no mistakes, right? Like they hit every note. Like, yeah, it's impressive, but at the same time, it doesn't speak to you or really hit you, in the feels the same way that it hits you when someone else, is relatable and like makes a mistake that shows that they're human just like you, right? So yeah, basically if you want to be more magnetic, maybe that's what I'll call this episode, like how to get into your magnetism, even though I feel like if I was going to focus on magnetism specifically, there's so much more I could talk about. But yeah, that's what I get for not planning, but it's okay. I'm liking this. We're feeling good. We're feeling good. Yeah, the more magnetic you want to be and the more powerful you want to reach people with your work and just with your being, and your presence and your message and who you are, then the less perfect you want to be and the more you want to embrace your mistakes and embrace messy action, right? So coming like back around full circle to this idea of, like self-sabotage and procrastination and overthinking is like, again, we get in our head like we're trying to make it perfect. And so it seems complicated because it's actually impossible to make it perfect. And taking messy action is literally the key to success. And honestly, most of the time when I say messy action, like you're going to feel like it's messy. It's really just like action. It's just like normal action. But we almost have to like call it messy action to like, again, like hack our brain to get out of the perfectionism. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, brain, like this is messy, right? Like I'm doing air quotes, but really it's just like to get yourself out of that like myth standard, that unrealistic standard of being perfect. Like telling yourself, yep, it can be messy just so that you can actually just do it and let yourself be real with it, right? And that was kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, again, on this note of procrastination and self-sabotage is really like how to hack your brain to bust through the procrastination. So yeah, this is kind of like, this episode is like half magnetism, half intuition, overthinking, perfectionism, half procrastination busting, but like it's also all the same thing. So that'll be fun coming up with the title for that. But So there's really like two things you can do, right? So on this note of messy action is like sometimes you really do just have to like just fucking do it, right? JFDI, just fucking do it. Like you just have to, like I did with this episode, right? Guys, I like was in such a bad mood this week because I knew like I have to record this week. And I've been putting off this podcast for so long, again, because of procrastination. And also on that note, I wanted to say too, I know in my bones, I know so well, like to my core, this podcast is going to change my life. It's going to blow up my business. It's going to lead to so many opportunities. It's going to probably be my favorite part of my business of what I'm doing, right? Like I'm going to love it. I already love it. And it's going to bring so much magic to my life. I know that. And so much growth and just incredibleness. That is why I'm putting it off so much, right? And I'm going to get to the point where I just feel excited to sit down and record an episode, right? It's not like I'm going to be dreading recording every time. I'm going to be just excited once I get past this fear. And so anytime you're feeling that much resistance and procrastination to something, remember to resistance is a sign of magic. It's a sign that you're about to have a breakthrough, right? Because there has to be resistance before you can really literally break through, right? What's a good metaphor of this? Like, all right, I did this yesterday. I was working out and I was doing my exercises to failure, right? If you know 444, if you know anything about exercise, you know that one of the most effective ways to grow your muscles is to do an exercise to failure until you literally like cannot complete the last rep because you're breaking through that threshold, right? You're literally showing to your body like, oh, muscle, you are actually not strong enough to complete this rep, aka signaling to your survival brain, we're not strong enough to survive. And that is what like, creates the tears in your muscle and then they have to rebuild stronger, right? That's what helps your muscle actually grow and build bigger than it was before, right? If you stay in your comfort zone and you just do the amount of reps that you're able to do every time, you'll maintain, right? But you won't grow. So resistance is a sign of growth, right? So anytime you're feeling resistance to something or you're procrastinating something, the more that you're procrastinating it, the more resistance you feel to doing it and to moving forward with it, the actually more powerful it's going to be. And the more quickly it's going to elevate you and timeline jump you to a higher timeline, right? The bigger quantum leap you're going to make, the more resistance you feel once you push through that resistance and take the action anyway, right? So I know that my podcast is going to be huge. And that's why I've been procrastinating it so much, right? And overthinking it because my brain's working overtime. Because again, safety survival brain wants to stay in your comfort zone, doesn't want you to actually do the thing, doesn't want you to go into a higher timeline, right? Doesn't want you to grow because that seems scary, right? It's change. Again, it's outside of the comfort zone. Your brain always wants to stay in the comfort zone, in the familiar, right? Wants to be able to predict. It does not like the unknown, which growth is change, right? And there's a lot of unknown. So all that to say, I was literally in like such a bad mood this week. And it wasn't me, but it was because I had all of this like fear and resistance coming up because I knew like I was getting closer and closer and closer to this podcast actually coming out, actually making this happen and taking the action. And so even recording the episode, like I was subconsciously finding so many ways to avoid it and even consciously, right? So many ways to avoid actually taking the action. So yeah, I just wanted to also note that, like, just notice, like, and know, like, when you're feeling that resistance and when you're procrastinating, yeah, it's easy to get discouraged. Like, why am I doing this? But also, like, use it as encouragement. Like, wow, like, how much incredible magic and growth must be on the other side of me taking this action if I feel this much resistance to it, right? And yeah, so then sometimes it's enough to literally just say that and be like, all right, you know what, Jeremy, like, you're just fucking do it. Like, just fucking record the podcast, get over your shit, and just sit down and record it, right? Take messy action. And that's what I did today. But sometimes it does require, some deeper inner work, right? And again, I've been doing this work for a while, so I can also kind of go through this process a lot more quickly than you might be able to when you are first, being introduced to this and you haven't really like done this kind of mindset work before. But you can hack your brain to actually make it seem easy. So basically it's like over time, the more that you like practice pushing through this resistance, the easier it will be to just like do the uncomfortable thing. And you actually like build a neural pathway to doing the uncomfortable thing. Like it becomes the default for you to just do the uncomfortable thing and push through the resistance, if that makes sense. Like almost like the discomfort becomes what's comfortable to you. Like you get comfy with the discomfort. But what you can also do is you can just actually address the questions and the fears and make them not seem scary to your brain, right? So I could sit down with my journal or talk to a coach or talk to a friend or just talk out loud to myself or go into meditation or whatever it is. And I can address all the reasons why recording this podcast episode seems like a difficult, scary thing to my brain, right? So I can start to dive into like what fears are coming up. Like, what am I afraid is going to happen if I put this out? Maybe like I'm afraid that people are going to judge me or that I'm going to sound dumb or like I'm so excited about this. And what if it actually flops? And then I like prove myself wrong, right? And not all these fears are rational again, because again, I know deep down that this podcast is going to be wildly successful. But of course, those fears are going to come up again, right? It's always coming from that negativity and doubt trying to keep you safe. Right? So, and also like past experiences and everything like that. So I can actually sit down with those fears, right? And face them and accept them and acknowledge them and talk myself through them, right? And actually reframe them and be like, okay, well, actually, even if this happens, like I'll still be okay. Or actually, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And actually work through those to one, not only process them energetically and process the emotions energetically, but also flip the script in my brain so that now my brain thinks, oh, recording a podcast episode? Yeah, that's awesome. That's going to be so easy. That's going to lead to all these awesome things. That's not even a lot of work, right? So you can actually like hack your brain to not procrastinate also in that way. Okay, so I feel like that's a good place to end this episode. I feel like we got a little bit of everything good. Overthinking, perfectionism, complexity, messy action, how to break out of procrastination. Oh, I guess one other thing I want to say on the note of breaking out of procrastination cycles is regulating your nervous system. So what can often be happening is you're actually in like a freeze response or a freeze state. And so you're literally just like your body doesn't even feel safe to take action. So there are so many ways you can regulate your nervous system. I won't like list them all here, but the number one thing that I tell people to do when you find yourself procrastinating, putting a ton of pressure on yourself to do anything, right? And this kind of ties back to the perfectionism thing, right? Because the pressure is often coming from like we have these really high standards, right? This fear of not being enough or not being good enough. And really these unrealistic standards, right? Like unrealistically high or even impossible standards, right? It's almost like if we have this belief deep down that, we're never going to be enough, then we'll always have the standard out of reach. And that's where perfectionism really is like rooted in a lot of the time. So whether it's with work, working on your business, with a project, a personal thing, whatever it is, what I recommend is for at least 24 hours, completely remove this thing from your radar, completely take it off your radar, take it off the schedule, tell yourself like, hey, you do not have to think about this at all for the next day. You are off the hook, right? Don't want you to worry about work. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, this day, I just want you to do whatever makes you feel good, right? Literally just focus on you. One of my very first clients, I remember because she's such a perfect example of this. She was trying to start a coaching business and she was procrastinating. She'd been procrastinating for a really long time, just not taking action. She's like, I have all these ideas and I just don't act every single day. And on the one hand, too, something else I'll say is when you're stuck in a procrastination cycle for so long, what can happen is you can actually start to make a new story where you actually just have a story running in your head of like, I just don't get things done. Like, I'm just not going to act on this. And like the more you procrastinate, the more you reinforce that. And then it becomes where the reason you're procrastinating is not even actually because of like the fears that drove the procrastination initially. It's actually because you've just made a story now and now you have a belief and you're identifying, which we'll talk about identity work another time, but now you are identifying with that story of I just don't take action, I just don't get things done. So if you've been stuck in a procrastination cycle for like a while, that might be something to look at first of like, all right, how can I actually like break through that belief and flip that script to be like, actually, I get shit done, right? And you might have to actually address that piece first before you even get to those deeper fears that are driving the procrastination. But anyway, back with this client, she had been procrastinating in her business. And basically what we did in our session was we talked about all of the fears that are holding her back, right? Like why she was judging herself. She was afraid of being judged, everything bad that could happen if she actually took action in her business and her, or if her business became successful, right? And why she actually felt bad taking action to start her business, right? Because she was worried that her friends were going to judge her. She's going to make her friends feel bad because she could be making money doing something she loves and they can't, right? So those are all the kind of beliefs that you need to illuminate and then call out and reframe before you're going to be able to take action, right? Because as long as her brain was thinking like, oh, well, you can't actually work on your business because then all your friends are going to feel really bad and then they're going to be mad at you, then like, why on earth would she take action, right? Of course she wouldn't want to if that's what's running in her brain. So that was one thing. We had to illuminate all those and kind of work through those. But the other thing was she was putting so much pressure on herself, right? Which often this pressure and perfectionism and procrastination, they all go hand in hand. She was putting so much pressure on herself to do work and so much shame, right? And guilt for not taking action. It was building every single day that she didn't take action. It was getting worse and worse and worse, right? So it's like actually the more pressure and shame and guilt she felt, the less likely she was to take action, which it just fed it. It was like a vicious cycle, like a spiral, a cycle that was feeding itself, right? So the first thing that I had her do was take the next day completely off, be like, tomorrow, you don't have to do anything with your business. Tell yourself all your obligations are gone. You are free to do whatever you want and just do you. Have a day for you. Do something that makes you happy, even if it's something so small. And she messaged me the next day and she was like, I'm feeling much better. I just took it slow today and I actually made myself one of my favorite sandwiches and I haven't really cooked for myself in a really long time. And I really actually enjoyed it and I feel really good. And then I actually felt so motivated that I actually posted about one of my offers. And then I actually got an inquiry out of nowhere from a client who's actually a dream client. And she was just such a perfect magical example of how this works because it's the second she took the pressure off and just did something that genuinely brings her joy, got her, again, energy into alignment, right? Raised her vibration simply just by making herself a sandwich, okay? And doing a small, simple act of self-care. The motivation then naturally just magically appears. She takes a simple action, right? So simple, just posted about my offer. It wasn't 10,000 complicated steps that she had probably been pressuring herself before that she had to do it perfectly. And then she gets an inquiry from a client, literally within 48 hours of our session. So that was just a beautiful example of how this works. And I think that's a perfect way to button up this episode and really show you again, energy speaks louder than words. And what I also like to always say is anytime you catch yourself overthinking or in perfectionism or procrastination or putting pressure on yourself or feeling like something's really complicated or whatever, and you're really wanting something right, it's not happening, you're not taking action, or you're stressing about it, ask yourself, how is my energy right now, right? Am I feeling stressed and guilty and, overwhelmed and frustrated and shamed and worried and scared, right? Or am I feeling light and fun and fresh and happy and at peace and joyful and confident, right? And then the next step after that is if your energy is low, if you're in a low vibe, then the only thing you need to do right in that moment is what can I do to raise my vibe? What can I do to get my energy back in check, back into alignment, to actually feel confident in this and this and this? And a lot of time will probably be to actually stop directly working on whatever you're working on and go do something completely different. You just have to remember it is all connected, right? It's not the second you stop doing tangible work on something and go tend to your energy in a different way, you're not still making progress because, again, energy speaks louder than words. And that's really what I just want you to always come back to is come back to if something's not working, how's my energy? Check my energy. How can I raise my vibration and get more into alignment right now in this moment? And that is what is going to make the magic happen. And again, also, your intuition will always be guiding you, right? It will always actually be telling you that next step of how to shift more into alignment or shift back into alignment, right? So that's where really connecting back to your intuition is going to be so powerful, because when you ask yourself that question, like, oh, my energy is off, like, how can I shift my energy? Your intuition will tell you, right? Your intuition will guide you. So intuition and energy are always the answer. The answers are always simple, and nobody's perfect. So with that said, I hope that you loved this episode. I hope that you took something away from it. I hope that you feel my energy, and I hope that it helped yours. Thank you so much for listening to all 3 of the first 3 episodes. I hope you got so much value from them. If you did find them valuable, you want to help support the podcast or support me, you can enter the giveaway, and it would mean so much to me just by sharing the podcast on social media, sharing your biggest takeaway and tagging me, sharing it with a friend and sending me a screenshot, and rating and reviewing the podcast. That one is super, super helpful to help support the podcast and help it reach more people. So you can just simply rate it on Spotify or rate and review on Apple Podcasts. You don't have to write a huge long review, just anything that you liked about it. And just make sure to screenshot that before you submit and just send me the screenshot so they know you entered. And again, it's just super, super helpful. And you can also get a chance to win $1,000 credit to any of my offers in working with me, any of my programs, or a $50 gift card to just any store of your choice. So love you so much. Thank you so, so much again. I think this may have been my favorite episode so far. This is so freaking value packed. Also, let me know what you want to hear me talk about on the podcast. I'm happy to take your feedback and take requests into consideration. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day or night. Don't forget to stop, take a breath, and smile. And I will talk to you next Thursday. Bye.